In this lesson, we're going to look at modeling and solving two-step equations. This is part 2 of the last lesson where we looked at modeling and solving one-step equations. So, still doing the adding and subtracting, doing the reverse order of operations to eliminate values on their own, but still looking at the variable itself and how to kind of isolate that variable. So, a two-step equation refers to an equation where the variable has two operations performed on it. In this case, we have 6 times n plus 6. So we have a multiplication, 6 times n, which is the last step we'll do to get rid of that number 6. And we also have a plus, or add 6. So we have another operation that's being kind of directly connected to the variable of n. One operation is multiplying, the other is dividing. One operation is multiplying or dividing, and the second one is adding or subtracting. So in order to kind of get rid of it, as we will see below, we will still use the reverse order of operations to isolate the variable. And remember that we have to balance that equation, so we have to do the same thing to both sides. Step 1. Step 1 is we're going to look at the plus 6, and we're going to get rid of the plus 6 by subtracting. Okay, so this is also called the constant. It's a number by itself. So I'm going to subtract 6 on both sides. So on the left-hand side, I'm left with 6n. Remember, the plus 6 minus 6 cancel. And 12 minus 6 is equal to 6. Now I'm left with a one-step equation, right? And we've done these before. 6 times n, so I do the inverse operation. So step 2, divide or multiply. So step 1 will usually be adding or subtracting. And then step 2 will be either multiplying or dividing to get rid of the value that's directly connected to the variable. And this value is also called the coefficient. So these are terms that you have to be familiar with. In order to get rid of the 6 in front of the n, I divide by 6 on both sides. Remember that when I divide by 6 on the left-hand side, this equals 1. And I'm left with x. In this case, n does equal 1 because 6 divided by 6 is 1 as well. That's not always the case, though. So, two-step equations where we have to add or subtract first, then we do the division or multiplication. Reverse order of operations. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different examples we'll work through, so this should become very clear. So, solve each equation. We're going to solve for the variable. We're going to figure what x equals k, m, whatever the variable happens to be, by using reverse order of operations, probably adding and subtracting first, and then dividing and multiplying second. Okay, I'm going to use red in this case just to show each step. So, first step is, of course, adding or subtracting. I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. So on the right-hand side, that plus 4 minus 4 cancel out. I'm left with 3x, which is equal to 10 minus 4, which is 6. And my last step that I'm going to do is going to be division, because this is 3 times x. The opposite is dividing by 3 on both sides. So I get a value of x is equal to 2. Okay, so first of all, I subtracted because it was being added. Then I divided because it was being multiplied. And I isolated my variable in that way. Next one. So I have 2y minus 3 equals negative 9. The variable is y. I have two operations, 2 times y and a minus 3. So first of all, I'm going to add or subtract. So I'm going to add because this is being subtracted. I'm going to add 3 on both sides first. On the left-hand side, it cancels out. Right-hand, so I'm left with just 2y. Negative 9 plus 3 is a negative 6. And then my next step would be this is 2 times y. So I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides because that's the opposite operation. And so I'm left with y, because remember those cancel out to equal 1. Divide negative 6 by 2 to get negative 3. Okay, hopefully this is making a bit of sense. Part C. Now I have another example where the variable is on the right-hand side. That's okay. It becomes a little complicated, though, because you think, well, how am I going to get rid of this number on its own? Remember, I have to add or subtract first. Opposite operations. Is this 8 a positive 8? A negative 8? It's a negative 8 because it has a minus sign in front. To get rid of the negative 8, am I going to have to add or subtract? Well, what's the opposite of negative? It's a positive. So I'm actually going to have to add both sides, add 8 to both sides. Okay? So on the left-hand side, negative 32 plus 8 is negative 24. You can use a calculator if you need to. The 8s on this side are canceled out. And then I'm left with plus or positive or just 6k. That's where it becomes a little confusing, is this value that's in front of the 6. Is it positive? If it is, you don't have to write it, right? Because if we don't write the positive value, we're just assuming that it's positive. If it is negative, then though you would have to write the negative sign in front. And finally, this is 6 times k, so I'm going to divide both sides by a positive 6. So the left-hand side, I get 24 divided by 6, negative 24 divided by 6, which is a negative 4. 6's cancel out because they're equal to 1, and that's equal to a final value for k. So k is equal to negative 4. We'll keep going on here. This one should be maybe a little bit simpler. Yes, the letters on the left-hand side or right-hand side again. So the plus 10, again, I'm going to have to do the adding or subtracting first. So I subtract 10 on both sides. So the left-hand side, I'm left with negative 42 minus 10. You're getting further into the negatives. So it's actually negative 52, which is equal to, that's gone. So I'm just left with negative 4m. And then my final step is to divide by negative 4 on both sides. So 52 divided by 4. Again, you can use a calculator for that, but it's just 13. Is equal to m. Sorry, I didn't show that I was dividing by negative 4 on both sides. So I divide by negative 4 on both sides. I get my final value of 13, a positive 13 because I'm dividing a negative by a negative, which is equal to my value for m. Okay, we'll keep going. Now, x over 2, or x divided by 2 minus 3 equals negative 4. Again, my first step is going to be either adding or subtracting with these two-step. In this case, it's adding because I want to get rid of that minus 3 that's connected with the variable. So I add to both sides. I'm left with x over 2. Remember, the minus 3 plus 3 cancel out. On the right-hand side, negative 4 plus 3 is a negative 1. Again, your integers are very important here. If you're off, or if you do negative 4 plus 3 and you get negative 7 or something, your value, your final answer will be incorrect. And my final step, because this is x divided by 2, I multiply both sides by 2. So I end up with x, because remember the 2's canceled to become 1, and negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. The last example on this page, so f divided by negative 6 plus 12 is equal to 19. Should be fairly apparent what to do first again. So I subtract 12 on both sides. Then I'm left with f over negative 6 is equal to 19 minus 12, which is 7. Then I multiply by negative 6 on both sides because that's the opposite operation. Those equal 1. I'm left with just f is equal to negative 42. Okay, let's move on. 2 more, and then we'll get to a word problem, and then we'll be almost done this lesson. So I have the variable on the right-hand side again. So again, we have to think about, okay, well, that 4 is a positive because there's no negative sign written in front of it. So because it's positive, I have to subtract the 4 to get rid of it on both sides. So negative 7 minus 4 is negative 11, and that's equal to e over negative 2. E divided by negative 2, the opposite operation is multiplication, so I'm going to multiply by negative 2 on both sides. On the left-hand side, I have a negative times a negative, so that becomes a positive 22. That cancels, and I'm left with just e, which is equal to 22. Last example here. This one's fairly simple. I have n divided by 8 minus 2. First order of operations, I'm going to do opposite, right? I do the reverse order of operations, is adding. So I'm going to add because this is being subtracted. Add on both sides. 5 plus 2, of course, is 7. which is equal to n over 8. And this is n divided by 8, so I multiply by 8 on both sides. So I get 56 is equal to my value for n. I know I sped up a little bit at the end, but I think hopefully you're starting to get the idea of how these work with these two steps. You can always check your answers to see if they are correct, and they will ask you in the book. Check. So solve and check. Let's try the last one example because we've done these before. So I'm going to use part H. I'm going to start with my original equation. 5 is equal to n over 8 minus 2, and n is equal to 56. Remember the very first lesson we showed how to plug values in. I think it was 2 lessons ago or something. We plugged the value into the variable, replace the variable with the value, and solve the equation. We've done this before. So 5, we're going to check. Is 5, so I'm going to put a little question mark above the equal sign, is 5 equal to 56 divided by 8 minus 2? Right? That's what we're checking to make sure to see, did we do this right? So 56 divided by 8 is 7. 7 minus 2, you might have guessed it, is 5. So therefore, this checks out. That is correct. That is how you check. Start with your original equation, replace the variable with the value you found to check to see, is it correct? Is it right? So that's when the book says check, guess, or solve, and then check. Okay, one word problem. So modeling equations using word problems. So you have to write an equation when you're given a word problem. So here we have something. Mr. Howell has an old collection of PC games, I do, and Nintendo 3DS games, which I also do. I don't know if these values are actually correct, but I can see. So the number of 3DS games he has, or me, is 4 fewer than 5 times the number of PC games. 4 fewer. Now, this is how we come up with equations. 4 fewer means I'm going to subtract 5. Sorry, 4, not 5. 4 fewer means I'm going to subtract 4, oh my goodness, from the value. 5 times, of course, you might have guessed, we're going to multiply by 5. Okay, whatever our variable is, and this is according to our variable. 5 times the number of PC games. Mr. Howell has, so this will tell us one side of the equation, 21 3DS games. So that's one side. Okay, we already have a value for one side. So choose a variable representing the number of PC games Mr. Howell has. I'm going to choose P. Step 2, write an equation that represents this situation. So Mr. Howell has, we already have one side of the equation, which is 21. Mr. Howell has 21 3DS games. It's probably pretty close. And that's going to be equal to, start with your variable of P. So I'm going to put the variable of P in the equation, just so I have it there. Now, what's happening to the variable? Well, I know there's going to be 4 fewer, so I'm going to subtract 4. And there's going to be 5 times that number, so 4 fewer than 5 times the number. So I'm going to multiply the value of P by 5. And this is my equation. 4 fewer is 4 less, so subtracting 4. Then 5 times, which is 5 times my value for my PC games. And then we just solve. So hopefully that makes sense how I came up with that equation. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides to get rid of the 4. The left-hand side, I'm left with 25, which is equal to 5p. And then because this is 5 times p, I'm going to divide both sides now by 5. So I get a value of, oh, this is way off. I mean, this is correct in terms of this question, but not in terms of reality. So 25 divided by 5 is, of course, 5. And that's equal to my value for my old PC games. I probably have a collection upwards of 50 or 60 old PC games in big boxes from when I was a kid. But anyway, for the terms for this question, this is okay. So coming up with an equation, how to take words and convert them to mathematical operations. You'll see words like more, less, right? And these are how to come up with these. In some questions, you will be given the equation to solve, In this case, we had to come up with the equation ourselves. So, but in a lot of questions in the textbook, you're actually given the equation. So sometimes you don't have to come up with the equation. However, you will have questions where you have to come up with the equation. So if you see words like, let's just write some more words down. So more equals plus. Less is equivalent to minus. Times, of course, is very simple. That one's just multiplication. The division one, they might say the quotient. They might say things like that. Quotient. Or they might actually just be very clear and say divide. But remember, quotient is division, of course. So words to look for: fewer, less, more, greater than, right? These words are going to be equal to plus or minus. And times or quotient, those are going to be adding and dividing. So hopefully that lesson helps. Let me know if you have any questions.